welcome, a very warm welcome. I'm Caro Verbeek. And I noticed that I enjoy it when you unmute yourself, because then I feel your presence. Otherwise, it's a bit eerie. It's like there's no one there. But it's all up to you, of course. It's all up to you if you do or do not want to unmute. And we'll talk about, this is the second of 3 kitchen cabinet smell sessions. Last week, we talked about, what did we talk about last week? I already forgot. I do so many lectures.
Peanut butter.
Yes, about a subcategory in olfactory art, in Dutch olfactory art, which is floor pieces, olfactory floor pieces. And for those of you who are not familiar with scent culture, olfactory is the adjective for smell, like visual is to seeing. Today we'll talk about the smell of war and the smell of victory, the smell of defeat. And I'll share my screen. Yep, there it is. And usually, I'm the founder of Odorama, a scent culture platform here in the Netherlands, and I co-curate that with Frank Bloem, who is also present. And usually during these events, we diffuse smells with an aroma jockey. With electrical fans and steam, we diffuse smells. And of course, during Corona, that's impossible. Frank Bloem has also sent around smell kits. But in this case, we thought, hey, maybe we can find some historically interesting smells in our own kitchen cabinets, or at least in a supermarket. And that's what these sessions are based on. And yeah, so the program of today, these sessions are very short, very accessible, not academic, but more popular. We'll talk a bit about Proustian memory, because that's important in relation to war. Then the smells of war. And these are the 3 ingredients I asked you to fetch. So laurel and eau de cologne and rosemary. I guess when you're familiar with scent culture, you've read about Proustian memory a million times, but we're just going to talk about it again. And also for those of you that are new, because it's such an amazing story. Proustian memory is named after the French author Marcel Proust, who wrote In Search of Lost Time, a very complete series of books. And one of those novels, Swan's Way, contains a beautiful description in which the main character, Marcel, gets a cup of lime blossom tea and a madeleine shortcake, dips his shortcake in his lime blossom tea, takes a bite, and he's suddenly overwhelmed with a very vivid, emotional recollection of his visits to his aunt in Cambrai, whom he used to visit on Sundays. And he's flabbergasted, and he thinks, okay, seeing the cake and the tea didn't do anything. Thinking about the words didn't do anything, but smelling it, however, really made time and place disappear, as if I was there again. Also, reliving all the emotions he felt the moment he first smelled and tasted this cup of tea. So this is now proven, this phenomenon, a scientific fact, that the chemical senses are most best capable of eliciting, evoking early childhood memories. And the chemical senses are taste and smell. And of course, we don't just taste with our mouths, we also smell with our mouths, which is called flavor. So it's really the smell that brought Marcel Proust, or Marcel, the main character, back in time. And those kinds of memories.
Caro?
Yeah?
I have a question. Do you know why it's always childhood memories?
Yes, I have an idea about that. That's because when these memories are shaped when we first encounter a smell, and this usually happens during childhood. Because at 40, you've smelled most things. So The first time you encounter a smell, usually during childhood, you still have to decide, is this safe or is this dangerous? So if it's safe, which means in a safe context, perceived in a safe context, this smell will forever be pleasurable. If you encounter that smell for the first time in an unsafe context, you will find this smell terrible for the rest of your life. So our appreciation for smells doesn't have so much to do with the odorants in question, but the context we perceive them in. And that means that the smell of a cigar can be very pleasant because you smelled it as a child for the first time at your grandfather's house. If he was nice, if he was a bully, if he was unkind, if he hit you, then the smell of cigars will be a stink. You will not find this smell agreeable. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And that's also why these smells take us back to our early childhood, to the moments we first encountered certain smells. And the difference with a memory triggered by a textual cue, so that would mean me asking you, hey, what did you wear at your 11th birthday? That's very different from me presenting you the smells of your 11th birthday and then you recollecting the sounds, the images, what you were wearing, and what you felt like. That's the big difference. So you don't think about the past. You feel as though time and place have collapsed, are of no meaning. And I guess you all know this feeling, right? There's a whiff, a tiny whiff of a certain smell, and you remember something you didn't even know was stored in your memory.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
I had a very heavy emotional reaction of new carpets, and I didn't know why until I noticed that my parents were divorced, and my father, he had new carpet in his home, and the home was not pleasant for me. So that was really emotional, a reaction of new carpet, which was really strange for me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's a very good example of a Proustian memory and of a very emotional one at that, a negative emotion, I presume. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's the way it works. It can be very overwhelming. Often we don't immediately know why we feel a certain way, but often it's because of smells that we subconsciously connect to emotions and memories and situations. This also counts for smells of war. Now, why is this such an interesting topic? Because wars are the smelliest events on the planet. They come with a lot of olfactory turmoil, also with noise. And since ancient times, soldiers, when they write about war in their diaries, they do not mention the wounds as much as they mention the smells and the sounds. Those are most torturous. They suffer the most from the smells. Here are some nose witness reports. I took them from the book Zacht en Eervol by Leo ten Berge. So here's one. The same mind-numbing effect had the never-ending and never-diminishing stench. You never got used to that. You could smell the front rather than see it before you could see it. Or the screeching of the rushing shards hurts your ears, pounds your neck. Sorry, I have to move my own video, otherwise I cannot read it. Aches on your temples. And as you experience all this, you simply cannot stop the cry that escapes you. The sulfur smell makes me nauseous. So smells of war are pretty nauseating. They're terrible. And I think you all know this quote, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, taken from a movie Apocalypse Now, which is about Vietnam War. What does it actually smell like? Apparently, it smells like gasoline, laundry detergent, it smells of burning oil, or it smells like victory. Think of Proustian memory. Things smell like what you associate them with. It can be victory. It can be source-based, like burning oil, gasoline, and laundry detergent. And the context makes it a positive or a negative experience. These are other types of war smells. There are many. The smells of the field hospital, in which often carbolic acid was used. And this smells rather sweet. The smell of burnt and moist earth. Think of all the bombs and the impact of the bombs. Often deeper layers of earth will rise and be flying in the air, aromatizing the environment, which is kind of a, nice smell, you could say, unless you associate it to war. Smell of mustard gas, which smells of garlic. Think of all the animals and people, so manure and urine, lots and lots. The smell of fear, which smells very different from normal sweat. Smells of wounds, gas gangrene. Gas gangrene is a smell dentists know well. When they open your tooth and there's an inflammation, gas gangrene is absolutely awful. Then smells of putrefaction, decay. This is not a Proustian memory. That we're born to dislike this smell. It's the most terrible smell on the planet for us humans. It's in our DNA to dislike this particular smell. Smell of uniforms. The material has a very specific smell. Gunpowder, of course. Smells of cooking. And this is used also as a tool by soldiers to sniff out the enemy. When you go somewhere, you can smell how long ago someone cooked something there. So you know more about the enemy. You can sniff out the enemy. And then there's the military stink bomb by Ernest Crocker, an MIT scientist who was hired to create the most pungent stench on Earth to scare away the enemy. This was also done by Swedish scientists during a corona to prevent people from flocking. Yeah, the many uses of smell. Sometimes the smells are not different, you just perceive them differently. So the smells of home. You're at the front, you're a soldier. You do not smell home anymore. You miss these smells. They're so different and you perceive them differently once you smell them again. I found two amazing nose witness reports. So when a Russian girl is sent on leave as a reward for heroic behavior during the Second World War and returns after a few days, the other girls sniff her out because she smells of home, from the book The Unwomanly Face of War. And this one I recently read by concentration camp survivor Edith Eger. After being liberated, she walks through the streets of a small German village and she's surprised about the smells of normalcy. She cannot believe these scents have continued to exist while she was suffering in a stinking hell. The man who saves her from a pile of corpses, she remembers seeing him holding his nose while he pulls her out of that pile of bodies, and she survives. Then a bit of fresh air. This is all very heavy, of course. The smell of victory, which is a literal smell. It's an expression derived from a literal smell. When a Roman soldier behaved specifically heroic during battle, once back, he would be crowned with laurel, a laurel wreath, a beautiful crown, not because of the way it looks, but because of the way it smells. And laurel, especially fresh laurel, you might want to crush the leaves if you found some laurel, smells incredibly fresh. And it also helps you, it prevents you from getting a big hangover. So you can drink much more after your heroic behavior. And all the other soldiers, when they smell you, before they see you, they won't just think, wow, what a hero. They will feel, think of the Proustian memory, they will feel it in every fiber of their body. Hey, we're in the presence of a hero. So later, this olfactory crown became sublimated by a golden laurel crown, but this still refers to its olfactory origin, so to a smell. So when you look at all those statues with laurel, think of the smell of victory. Here you see a coronation with a laurel wreath. after a group of victors returns in Rome to the Forum Romanum in the middle of Rome. And then war smells and futurism. I just finished my PhD on futurism. It's now only in Dutch, but it will be translated to English. The Futurists, a group of artists, were known for their, well, glorification of war on paper, mostly on paper. So in one of their first manifestos, the leader of the Futurists, Marinetti, stated that war is the only hygiene in the world. This was before World War I. So when he could make this kind of statement. He also wrote this manifesto, Battaglia peso odore, so battle, weight, and smell. 3 things you cannot see that are ephemeral, but that you can feel or smell. That's what the futurists were really interested in. He wrote this poem on the Tripoli War between Italy and the Ottoman Empire. And he wants to emphasize that there are many smells at the same time, many smells and sounds at the same time that often form almost poetic contrasts. So, aroma, saffron, tar, axe, soap, dog, wet, jasmine, acacia, sandalwood, carnations. That's the speed with which Marinetti would recite poems. So to emphasize that all these things happen at the same time, the most terrible smells. Wet dog, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty awful. I don't connect it to a certain memory, but I think it's pretty awful. I don't know why. And then, of course, old eggs. But then again, also acacia, sweet sandalwood, so soft and beautiful carnations. That's what interested the futurists. Friction. Gino Severini was also a futurist artist. He became a cubist artist later. And he made this painting about sensory impressions of war, canoni in azione, so cannons in action. And when you look at the smoke emanating from the cannon, there it says, émanation de gaz points, pénétration désagréable, pointeur acide. Oh là là, ça sent mauvais. Excuse my French, I don't have the best pronunciation. So there are emanations of stinking gas. There's a pungent, disagreeable scent. There's acid stench. Oh la la, that smells terrible. This is very atypical because most futurists glorified the smells of war, except for putrefaction and laurel, because laurel reminded them of the past, and the futurists glorified, the word says it, the future. They also wrote about perfume, quite a lot about perfume. Soldiers bring with them perfumes from home, from their loved ones, their wives, their mistresses. It reminds them of home, Proustian memory. At the same time, it can mask the foul odors of war. So there was this rhyme that every Italian soldier knew, which translates as, there are 3 real kinds of comfort in the trenches. In Dutch, that would be loopgraven. It's the Contessa Azzurra, perfume, the Strega, liquor, and the return ticket. So knowing that you'll return home. I found a bottle of that perfume. Yeah, it's a shame I cannot make you smell it. And I lost it. Well, I had it. It's a very, well, if you smell it, you would say, ah, my grandmother. But those grandmothers were once young and modern and smelled of, for example, Contessa Azzurra, which means blue countess. The smell of defeat. And we're coming to an end. We're going to talk about a very famous defeat, the Battle of Waterloo, where Napoleon found his own Waterloo. And I just cannot not hear the song by ABBA. Do you hear it? Yeah. In your mind? But you probably cannot smell this in your mind. Only 1 out of 3 people can imagine smells. This is a painting by Jan Willem Pieneman from 1824. And in the middle, of course, we see the victor, the victorious Wellington. We also see William II. He was wounded and he had to be carried away. His father gave him this painting, which then ended up at the Rijksmuseum, the biggest painting in the collection. As a research project, part of my PhD, I worked together with IFF and with the Rijksmuseum, and in this case with Birgit Sijbrands, a senior perfumer, to recreate some historically informed smells, one of which was the Battle of Waterloo. And we then researched how people reacted when they smelled this and at the same time looked at this painting. And this composition was informed by what you see. So horses, there's the smell of horses, the smell of leather, because you can see all that leather, right? All those boots and all that gear for the horses. Look at the sky. What kind of weather do you think it was? It's very gray, right? So we know that it was raining. It had been raining for days, and that affects the smells, the surrounding smells. So there's also the smell of wet earth. There's the smell of gunpowder, which is very much like fireworks during New Year's. But there's also an invisible smell in the composition that Birgit Sijbrands made. And that was the perfume worn by Napoleon. Napoleon had an incredibly a sharp nose, but also very sensitive nose. He was easily repelled by a lot of smells. Women, paint. If something was freshly painted, he could not be there. And he very much enjoyed this perfume that he wore that day and every day. Liters were poured on his shoulders in the morning by his valet, by his assistant, and massaged, and on his temples. And during battle, he even used he put one of the bottles, cylindrically shaped, in his boot. So you could also use it during battle to refresh himself, to mask all the foul odors. And that scent was then known as Aqua Mirabilis by Jean-Marie Farina or Giovanni Maria Farina, and is now marketed as Echt Kölnisch Wasser 4711. Let's sniff Napoleon if you can, if you have this scent. And then usually what people would say in the museum when they smell this top note of the composition, they would say, hey, my grandmother, Proustian memory. So not thinking of their grandmother, feeling as though their grandmother is present. And then I would explain, well, this was also the perfume worn by Napoleon. And then you can really connect a Proustian individual memory to this historical sensation of feeling much more closely connected to that painting, to this episode, not just this painting, but this episode in time, because smell is known to elicit very strong historical sensations. So know that you're sniffing Napoleon. Of course, you don't feel what Napoleon felt, but this was this scent. Why did he enjoy it so much? Because it was so fresh. And that's because of a certain ingredient that's very important in Eau de Cologne. I also wanted to show you this quote by a soldier during World War I. So it was still worn during World War I. During many wars, Eau de Cologne was used. And this soldier exclaimed, "Good Lord, it's worth being hit for this, after the smell of dead horses, dead men, dead everything." So he was taken to a hospital. There he was treated with Eau de Cologne, just to revivify him. And that was so worth getting hurt for. You see how the stench was worse than the pain. Well, Napoleon was exiled to St. Helena. He had to stay in that house there in Longwood. And he missed his Eau de Cologne so much because it reminded him of better days when he was an emperor. So he had his assistant Ali do research in the library in that house in Longwood. to find the recipe of the eau de cologne and then reconstruct it from the ingredients on the island. And one of the important ingredients is rosemary, which is present on that island. Let's crush the rosemary. Let's smell. Yeah, you can smell how fresh it is, right? But also a bit umami and a bit salty. I always think. Yeah. And that recipe was written down by Ali, by the assistant of Napoleon, found by the Osmothèque, the smell conservatory in Versailles, and then reconstructed by Jean Kerléo. So this is a reconstruction of eau de cologne, of an 18th century scented water.
Yeah. What is that? Which one is that?
This is the one by Jean Kerléo, the eau de cologne. That was reconstructed from the recipe that was found in Longwood. So that was written down by Ali, by the assistant of Napoleon.
And what does it smell like? Is it different from this one?
I wish I could make you smell it. Yeah, it is different. This is sweeter. So 4711 is much sweeter. This is a bit more umami, but it has a lot of rose. It does have rosemary. And I also have the farina. And the farina is a bit more spicy, slightly. Yeah, Frank and I tried to reconstruct the farina recipe, which is much more spicy. Yes, and I also have the boldood, that's the Dutch version. And I also have the predecessor, which is the aqua regina. Yeah, I'm a crazy...
What does boldood smell like?
Boldood, yeah. I have never opened this bottle. It's still closed. But they took the recipe not from 4711, but directly from farina.
Yeah, they bought the company.
Yes, and the recipe. And 4711 is slightly different from farina.
Yeah. So you keep the boldood a secret for yourself also.
Yeah, I don't dare to open it. There's a beautiful piece of textile here. Yeah, maybe I'll open it on a special day. Yeah.
That's not today.
No, I want to do it when I'm with you in a physical space. Yeah?
You mentioned something interesting that I wanted to ask. You said like this soldier was treated himself with a handkerchief of eau de cologne. Is that something? Is that something you know more about? Is there a common practice, let's say in trauma or like military victims or so, where like scent is used as a treatment?
I do know of some alternative therapies in which smell is used for treating PTSS.
Yeah.
Because smells can bring people back to traumatic experiences, not just Proustian, but also traumatic memories. And I also know that soldiers, militaries still bring perfume to war zones.
Okay.
They still do it. But yes, eau de cologne was also put on handkerchiefs, and that's the way our grandmothers still used it. Do you remember your grandmother using eau de cologne on a handkerchief, sniffing it to revivify herself, maybe on her temples?
Yeah.
Because originally this was not a perfume, but a medicine. It was also consumed in the time of Napoleon. Yeah, it was drunken.
Then they did not denaturate the alcohol.
Yes, before it was denaturated. Yeah. So here we see Napoleon thinking of home when he was an emperor, and all that his only tool to feel more at home, because his wife didn't want to come. He was alone with some of his assistants and their wives. Their wives came, but he died very lonely and depressed and bitter. During his funeral, there were pastilles, small like cookies, let's say, of eau de cologne. They were burned. So even during his I want to say reception, but I mean the funeral, there was a smell of 4711 during the ritual. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah. And if you want to make eau de cologne yourself, you can do a workshop. You can take this workshop by Frank Bloem. Can you say something about this, Frank?
Yeah, what we're going to do is, so it's the 2nd of April on Friday and the 28th of April. If you join this workshop, you will receive a box at home, and through a Zoom session, we will reconstruct an old recipe. I think, Caro, you know the recipe. I know the recipe by you. It's a farina recipe, or what is no?
Yeah, it's a 19th century eau de Cologne recipe. That's probably after farina. Yeah.
Yeah. So we will use 2 methods of making eau de Cologne. One is by making a tincture. The other one is by dripping essential oils in alcohol. So if you are looking forward to doing that together with me, you can go to the website of Mediamatic and book yourself a ticket.
And I can say I did this workshop. I took this workshop, and it was amazing and so revivifying to smell these. All these scents are so refreshing. You can almost imagine why it was Napoleon's favorite perfume and why it's the oldest still marketed scent out there. Yeah. And if you want to do another kitchen cabinet smell session, next week is the final one. And we'll talk about the smell of health and the smell of disease. And what you need to bring is vinegar, nail polish remover, and nutmeg. And if you have any questions, I'm still available for a couple of minutes.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
very much.
Thank you.